He didn't look like a race car engineer. He didn't act like a corporate insider. Smokey Yunick strolled into the world of stock car racing looking like a cowboy who wandered onto the track by mistake. But under that signature wide-brimmed hat and behind the ever-burning cigar was a mind that would go on to terrify tech inspectors and frustrate rule makers for decades. Born Henry Smokey Yunick in 1923 in Neshaminy, Pennsylvania, his early life wasn't paved in chrome or horsepower. His first love wasn't cars, it was challenge. That fire would follow him into the Air Force, where he flew 50 combat missions over Europe in World War II as a B-17 bomber pilot. That fearlessness? It never left him. After the war, Smokey settled in Daytona Beach and opened a small garage with a name as bold as the man himself. The best damn garage in town. It wasn't just a boast, it was a warning. From this tiny Florida shop would come some of the most controversial, innovative, and mind-bending vehicles the racing world had ever seen. Smokey didn't build cars to fit into molds. He built them to break records and rules. But before the controversy, there was curiosity. Smokey didn't come from money or big sponsorships. He wasn't handed a racing team. What he had was mechanical instinct, raw talent, and a fierce belief that he could outthink anyone with a clipboard or stopwatch. His first cars weren't high-dollar masterpieces. They were homegrown hustlers, machines built with brains and boldness. And before long, people started noticing that whenever Smokey Yunick showed up, strange things started happening in the pits. He wasn't just another mechanic. He was a mad scientist with a wrench, a cowboy in a world of clean-cut engineers. And this was only the beginning. By the early 1950s, the name Smokey Yunick was being whispered in every pit lane from Daytona to Darlington. While other mechanics followed the rule book, Smokey treated it like a riddle, meant to be solved, questioned, and occasionally laughed at. He began building cars for stock car races back when stock actually meant something. And what set him apart wasn't just speed, it was how he found speed. Smokey's cars weren't faster because of flash. They were faster because he saw airflow where others saw drag, weight where others saw structure, and opportunity where others saw boundaries. His first big success came with Marshall Teague, one of NASCAR's early legends, who drove a Hudson Hornet built by Smokey to multiple victories. But it was his work with Herb Thomas that truly made headlines. With Smokey behind the wrenches and Thomas behind the wheel, they captured the 1951 and 1953 NASCAR championships. Smokey had officially arrived. Daytona was his proving ground, but it was also where the legend and the tension really began to grow. He wasn't afraid to challenge NASCAR officials head-on. In fact, he seemed to enjoy it. The officials would inspect his cars, confident they'd find nothing. And often, they didn't. But the truth was, Smokey played by a different kind of logic. A logic that exploited every gray area, every loophole, every oversight in the rulebook. His garage became known for producing cars that defied belief. Cars that passed inspection by a thread, but dominated the track by a mile. While other teams scratched their heads, Smokey grinned behind his cigar and got back to work. He was outsmarting the entire sport in plain sight, and doing it with swagger. To the racing elite, Smokey wasn't just a mechanic. He was becoming something more dangerous, a trendsetter they couldn't control. Step inside the best damn garage in town, and you weren't just entering a workspace. You were stepping into a laboratory of racing alchemy. Smokey Yunick's Daytona Beach shop was modest in appearance, but legendary in reputation. It was a place where innovation met rebellion, where conventional wisdom came to die, and where rules were treated as suggestions. if that. Smokey's garage was filled with secrets. Not the kind you could lock in a safe, but the kind that showed up at 180 miles per hour on the backstretch. He once installed a basketball inside a fuel tank so that it could pass inspection at the legal capacity, then deflated it before the race to make room for more fuel. He crafted cars with hidden fuel lines that snaked through the roll cage, giving him extra gallons without violating written limits. NASCAR didn't see it coming. Smokey knew they wouldn't. Then there was his infamous 7/8 scale Chevy Chevelle, a car that looked completely legal until inspectors noticed it seemed slightly smaller. Smokey had shrunk the body just enough to slip under the radar, reducing drag and increasing speed. When asked how it passed inspection, he quipped, "They never said how big the car had to be, just what kind it had to be." Smokey's philosophy was brutally simple. If it's not written down as illegal, then it's fair game. And if it gets written down later, that just means you were ahead of the curve. NASCAR scrambled to keep up. Rule changes were issued almost as fast as Smokey could innovate, but by then, the damage was done. The race was already over. To his peers, Smokey was either a mechanical genius or a menace. But love him or hate him, everyone agreed. He was playing chess while the rest played checkers. Smokey Yunick's reputation eventually outgrew his garage. By the mid-1960s, NASCAR officials would groan at the sight of his cars entering inspection. Not because they were illegal, but because they knew they were probably illegal in some new way they hadn't even thought to ban yet. Smokey didn't just compete in races. He competed with the rulebook itself, and often won. Rival teams began to resent him. Some called him a cheat. Others said he was ruining the sport. But deep down, many were just angry. They hadn't thought of it first. Smokey represented something more threatening than dishonesty. He represented uncomfortable progress. He proved that the system could be gamed, bent, and even broken with enough ingenuity and guts. The tipping point came during a notorious race inspection where Smokey's car had already passed scrutiny, but officials were still suspicious. They claimed he had an oversized fuel tank, removed it, and set it aside. Smokey climbed in, started the car, and famously drove it away, without a fuel tank installed. "You missed 10 things," he reportedly muttered on the way out. From that day on, NASCAR rulebooks began including diagrams and detailed technical specs, many inspired by Smokey's stunts. What was once a loose set of guidelines became a fortress of fine print, designed specifically to prevent one man from breaking the sport. Smokey never apologized. He believed that racing was about outthinking your competition, not just outrunning them. If NASCAR had to change the rules to stop him, then he had already won. To this day, mechanics still study his builds. Not to copy, but to understand the mindset of a man who didn't just follow rules. He made the sport rewrite them. Smokey Yunick lived in a world painted in shades of gray. Where others saw black and white rules, he saw opportunity. But the question that continues to haunt motorsports circles is this: was Smokey Yunick a cheater or a champion? To answer that, you have to understand how Smokey saw the game. He once said, "If the rule book doesn't say I can't do it, then I can." That mindset made him a hero to innovators and a villain to purists. In Smokey's eyes, he wasn't cheating. He was exposing weak rules. He believed racing was about finding every advantage, every loophole, every fraction of speed hidden in design and execution. The technical rulebook didn't limit him. It dared him to be smarter than the people who wrote it. And when Smokey outsmarted NASCAR, it wasn't an act of rebellion. It was sport. But rivals weren't so philosophical. Teams that spent months building competitive cars within the spirit of the rules often felt blindsided when Smokey showed up with something that felt off. A car that technically followed the rules, but ethically? That was up for debate. And that gray area is where Smokey thrived. Over time, Smokey's reputation as a rule bender turned into a legend of its own. Fans wore best damn garage hats and quoted his lines. NASCAR, for all its frustrations, couldn't deny his genius. And even those who criticized him often admitted, privately, that they'd copy his tricks if they could just figure them out. What made Smokey so hard to label was that his cars worked. They didn't just pass inspections, they won. In a sport obsessed with inches and milliseconds, he delivered both. So, was he a cheater? Or was he simply better at the game than everyone else? That debate still fuels arguments in garages across the country. And it's why Smokey Yunick remains one of the most controversial legends in racing history. Some cars are fast, some are legendary. Smokey Yunick's cars were both. And then some. They weren't just vehicles. They were weapons. Tools built with such cunning that even years later, engineers struggle to understand how he pulled them off. His most famous builds weren't just rule benders. They were engineering riddles on wheels. Take the infamous 7/8 scale 1966 Chevy Chevelle. Smokey literally built a Chevelle that was slightly smaller than regulation size. It wasn't noticeable at a glance, but on the track, it cut wind like a knife. Less drag meant more speed. He shaved off weight, massaged the aerodynamics, and still somehow made it past visual inspection. NASCAR eventually figured it out, but not before it made headlines. Or his fuel line trick. Smokey ran 11 feet of extra fuel line, enough to store additional fuel and gain an edge in endurance races. That single trick bypassed fuel capacity rules without actually violating them, because the line wasn't classified as part of the tank. It took NASCAR years to plug that loophole, and by then, Smokey had moved on to the next idea. Even his Indy 500 entries turned heads. His sidecar-style design in the early 60s was so radical it got banned before it ever hit qualifying. Smokey claimed it was within the rules, but Indy officials didn't want to find out the hard way. These weren't accidents. They were intentional engineering hacks designed to walk the razor's edge between legal and legendary. And while other builders tried to keep up, Smokey's mind was already miles ahead, solving the next problem, planning the next ambush on convention. His cars became myths. Some claim they were unbeatable. Others say they were unfair. But what no one can deny is that Smokey Yunick's builds changed racing forever. Not just by breaking records, but by breaking expectations of what a race car could be. For all the controversy and criticism, there was one group that consistently stood behind Smokey Yunick: the drivers. Why? Because Smokey gave them something no one else could: a machine that made them feel invincible. If you were behind the wheel of a Yunick-built car, you weren't just racing, you were hunting. Top-tier drivers like Fireball Roberts, Herb Thomas, and Mario Andretti trusted Smokey not just with their careers, but with their lives. And in an era when cars were far from safe, that trust meant everything. Smokey didn't just chase speed, he chased safety innovations long before the sport was ready to listen. Reinforced roll cages, improved fuel cell placement, better seating positions. Smokey was thinking about these things while NASCAR still turned a blind eye. His drivers said that his cars handled better, ran cleaner, and fought harder on the track. They weren't always the prettiest, but they were the smartest. And when you're flying inches from death at 180 miles per hour, you want a genius on your side. Even when the media painted Smokey as a villain, his drivers knew better. They saw the hours he put in, the risks he took, and the loyalty he showed to the people who strapped into his builds. He wasn't just building cars, he was building trust. And in racing, that's everything. Some drivers even said that racing for Smokey was the highlight of their careers. Not because of fame or fortune, but because they knew they were part of something bigger, something bolder. Smokey Yunick wasn't just giving them an edge. He was giving them a legacy. And maybe that's the biggest reason why, to this day, so many former racers still speak his name with reverence, because they remember what it felt like to drive a car built by a man who didn't just challenge the rules, he rewrote them. If Smokey Yunick was the outlaw, then NASCAR was the law, and their battles were the stuff of motorsports legend. It wasn't just about rules, it was about respect, control, and two very different visions of racing. Smokey believed in innovation. NASCAR believed in order. And eventually, those opposing forces collided hard. Smokey's relationship with NASCAR had always been tense, but things reached a boiling point in the late 1960s. After years of skirting regulations and embarrassing inspectors, Smokey had become a thorn in NASCAR's side. Every time they closed one loophole, he opened another. But when they started changing rules specifically to block his innovations, Smokey saw it as sabotage. The infamous 15 Rules story still echoes through racing folklore. After a race in 1967, Smokey's car was impounded for inspection. Officials claimed they found multiple violations, so many, in fact, that Smokey quipped, "They found 15 things illegal, and I only built 14 of them." His sarcasm didn't help. That same day, he reportedly drove the car out of the tech garage without the fuel tank installed, just to prove a point. Yes, he literally drove it away under its own power, flipping off inspectors on the way out. Eventually, Smokey had enough. He accused NASCAR of favoritism, hypocrisy, and chasing television deals at the expense of engineering integrity. His final break came when he felt the sport no longer respected builders like him, only the sponsors writing checks. He walked away, bitter and disillusioned. But while NASCAR may have turned the page, Smokey's departure left a hole. The sport lost one of its sharpest minds, and its rulebook got thicker. Smokey didn't just rebel, he forced NASCAR to grow up. And even though they rarely mention him in official history, every technical regulation bears his fingerprints. It was a war Smokey never truly lost, because he rewrote the battlefield on his way out. Smokey Yunick's garage was legendary, but it was only part of the story. When he left NASCAR behind, he didn't retire, he redirected. Because Smokey wasn't just a mechanic, he was a restless thinker, a maverick inventor, and a man who couldn't sit still if there was a problem left unsolved. Back home in Daytona Beach, he poured himself into experimental projects. His shop, the best damn garage in town, wasn't just a catchy name, it was a living lab. Smokey worked on high-efficiency engines, early hybrid concepts, and even explored vapor carburetors long before the industry cared about fuel economy. He believed in pushing boundaries, whether it was on the track or in the physics of combustion. Smokey also had a pen as sharp as his wrench. His autobiography, Smokey Yunick's Power Secrets, pulled no punches. Part workshop manual, part confessional, it laid bare his philosophy on racing, business, and life. He spoke about the politics of NASCAR, the greed he saw infect the sport, and the science the public never understood. It was blunt, unfiltered, Smokey to the core. He even considered a run for political office and wrote opinionated columns on everything from education to ethics. To Smokey, the world wasn't run by the smartest. It was run by those willing to exploit the dumbest rules. That belief fueled both his innovations and his frustration. And through it all, he kept fixing things. Race engines, classic cars, broken systems. Smokey's hands never stopped moving, and his mind never slowed down. In a world that demanded conformity, Smokey Yunick insisted on contribution. He wasn't building just for speed anymore. He was building for meaning. Today, Smokey Yunick's name is more than a footnote. It's a litmus test. Mention him in a garage, and you'll instantly learn what someone values. Do they crave pure competition? Or do they admire audacious creativity? Because Smokey didn't just challenge the racing world, he dared it to be smarter. His legacy isn't trophies, it's transformation. NASCAR, IndyCar, drag racing, they all evolved because they had to. Smokey forced the industry to tighten rules, improve safety, and rethink performance standards. And while some call him a cheater, history calls him something else: necessary. His story resonates because it's not just about racing, it's about resistance. In a world obsessed with status and structure, Smokey represented the rebel thinker, the kind who reads the fine print not to follow it, but to beat it. He showed what happens when one man combines mechanical genius with absolute confidence and zero fear. Even today, engineers study his builds, fans wear his hat, and every time a mechanic questions a spec sheet, Smokey's ghost is in the room. His lessons go beyond the garage. Trust your instincts, question authority, and never accept limits as law. Smokey died in 2001, but his impact hasn't faded. Young builders invoke his name. Old rivals still grudgingly respect him. And the racing world, for all its polish and progress, still can't quite figure out how to replace him. Because there was only one Smokey Yunick. No second acts, no copycats. Just one cigar-chomping, rule-breaking, heart-stopping force of nature who made damn sure the world would never forget his name.